Hi, everybody. Welcome to Christian Homestead. My name is Jared, and unfortunately, it looks like President Holland has passed away. And it's kind of not a surprise. I feel like I've seen this thing before. We saw the news come out on Christmas Eve that he was hospitalized, and I want to say that I remember seeing this same type of announcement go out for Queen Elizabeth. I think also the Pope, who passed away. Was it earlier this year or was it last year? I can't remember. But it seems like a lot of the time they'll put out kind of a soft announcement when they know that it's going to happen, but they won't say that the person is dying, but that they're hospitalized. And then shortly after they pass away. And so anyway, it doesn't come as too much of a surprise. But I don't know. I didn't expect to wake up to this morning. I just barely woke up and saw the news. I had a video scheduled, but I'm going to push that back to either later today or tomorrow. I'm not sure. But I have some thoughts, some more things that I've realized. And, you know, you might want to watch this video that I did on Christmas Eve when he was hospitalized, because we reviewed a lot of things about President Holland in his life. Afterwards, I realized that there were a few more things that I meant to mention, so I'll do it here. Let me just first say, I'm very sad. I am very sad because, for all intents and purposes, he's been an apostle my entire life. Now, not literally. I think he became an apostle in, yeah, it says right here, 1994. But for me, I was in elementary. And so, from my point of view, it's like my memory basically goes back that far. I don't remember a whole lot more before 1994. And he was always such a powerful figure in my life. He really got my attention. I feel like, I mean, every prophet and every apostle is special, and they're a special witness of Christ. They've been called by the Lord, and they all have their missions to perform. But sometimes there are those that just really stand out, and I feel like President Holland was one of those. I think most people would agree. I can't count the number of times in my life that somebody would say that President Holland was their favorite apostle, and they loved his powerful way of speaking, and just his personality. He was so warm and easy to relate to. I wish I could have met him in person, because I can just picture how that interaction would go. And um it's just, I don't know, it's hard. Well, just like President Nelson, it's hard to picture the church going forward without President Holland. It felt like he was like a permanent fixture in the church. um we had this amazing thing happen where it seemed like he was supposed to pass away. He was about to pass away the last time that he was hospitalized. And then he didn't. And according to him and Elder Redland and others, it was a miracle that he returned to life. He came back. He delivered some really important messages, um, specifically what was told to him during his near-death experience, that we need to pray more. We need to take up our cross more earnestly and testify more. Like, that's what I feel like that may have been one of the main reasons why he came back, and that we need to take that seriously. Um, but yeah, oh gosh, there's a lot to talk about here. So let's get into it. With heavy hearts, we announce that President Jeffrey R. Holland, president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, died on Saturday, December 27th, 2025, at approximately 3:15 a.m. Mountain Standard Time, from complications associated with kidney disease while surrounded by his family. He was 85. The first thing I want to point out, it's really interesting that he passed away on the 27th. That's one of the first things that I thought when I found out this news, because if you'll remember, if we go to my spreadsheet, second coming timeline, President Nelson if we go back to September, President Nelson passed away on the 27th of September. And, it's all just speculation. It's just observing things. But I know that Caitlin with Anticipating Christ's Return is on the same page with me. We feel like maybe something really special happened with President Nelson and President Holland in that they could be the two witnesses. People will read that prophecy and take it very, very literally and say, no, they have to pass away at the same time. And then literally 3.5 days later, that's when they're going to be resurrected. Or they literally have to be street preaching in Jerusalem for 3.5 years. And so we didn't see it. I don't agree. I'm not going to rehash all that, but I don't agree. I think there's a possibility if there are literally two witnesses that it could be President Nelson and President Holland. I'm about to explain why. Just think about the fact that President Nelson was president of the church and President Holland became president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. Those are two really key positions as an apostle. President Nelson passed away 7 days before General Conference, and he served as president of the church for 7.7 years. And I have another spreadsheet. This isn't about President Nelson, but he literally, I've calculated it, he literally served for 7 years, 7 months, 7 weeks, and 7 days as president of the church. That's not made up. It's a fact. You can verify it. I have a spreadsheet that shows that. But he passed away on the 27th. And now 3 months later, 3 months later, President Holland passes away on the 27th. It's also interesting, we're about to talk about his relationship with the Jews in Israel and Jerusalem and the BYU Jerusalem Center. It's interesting to note that he passed away on the Jewish Sabbath. And also, I checked hebcal.com, where it shows our calendar with the Hebrew calendar, and it's the 7th of Tevet. Tevet is like the first winter month on the Hebrew calendar. It's the month associated with Dan, the tribe of Dan. I'm not going to go into all that, but it's interesting. A week after the 7th day of Hanukkah, the 7th day of lighting candles. So there's a lot of sevens associated with President Nelson's death and President Holland's death. Okay, continuing. President Holland became an apostle on June 23rd, 1994. At the time, he was serving as a General Authority 70. Prior to full-time church service, President Holland was president of BYU, commissioner of the church education system, and dean of BYU's College of Religious Education. He received his Bachelor of English and Master of Religious Education degrees from BYU. He also obtained Master and Doctor of Philosophy degrees in American Studies from Yale. And by the way, he's the one that was instrumental in the permission to build in the construction of the BYU Jerusalem Center as he was president of BYU. Okay, skipping down. President Holland was preceded in death by his wife, Patricia Terry, who passed away on July 20th, 2023. He is survived by their 3 children, 13 grandchildren, and several great-grandchildren. Well, just like President Nelson, I'm happy for him in the sense that he gets to reunite with a spouse that's on the other side of the veil, his eternal companion. He talked about how this was hard. He mentioned it in that first general conference that he spoke after being hospitalized, that this was a huge trial. He didn't know why the Lord decided to take Patricia and spare his life. Well, now I think we can say, he was meant to be here just a little bit longer and deliver messages, and who knows what other things he may have accomplished during this time. But he talked about in other places how, I remember, I don't know where it was, but he talked about how it was really lonely at home, that at nighttime he would, roll over and feel for Pat, and genuinely wondered for like a split second where she was. And so this is a very, very good day for him. He gets to be with her. He gets to be with other family members. He gets to be with other prophets and apostles and church leadership that's already on the other side of the veil. For him, I think he's having a really good time. So I'm happy for him in that sense. I feel more sorry for us. He was born in St. George, Utah, December 3rd, 1940. It's just interesting. He was born in December and he passed away in December. And then I'm glad that Newsroom decided to include this picture. President Holland's many other assignments included being partner to President Russell M. Nelson on the Prophet's first major trip as leader of the church in 2018, an 11-day journey to 8 cities in Europe, Africa, and Asia. Now, I want to point out, they may have gone to 8 cities, but they went to 7 countries outside the United States. 7. President Nelson did a lot of things by the number 7. I'm not going to go into all that right now, but this was no small thing. I don't think that this was any small thing. We're going to go to, let's go to my spreadsheet called Quotes A through Z, and we're going to read a couple things here. Okay, row 291 for Jerusalem. This is Deseret News, April 14th, 2018. President Nelson cancels visit to local sites, leaves Jerusalem as tensions rise in Middle East. It may be a foreshadowing of what would happen 5 years later in 2023. Okay, but I'm here. See right here. 7 countries right here in the article. 7 countries. President Nelson and Elder Holland offered messages of hope. Oh yeah, by the way, he wasn't, at the time, he was Elder Holland. He was not yet acting president of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles. President Nelson and Elder Holland offered messages of hope from the grounds of the BYU Jerusalem Center. Elder Holland said, President Nelson, quote unquote, decisively and instantly determined that his first major gesture beyond LDS Church headquarters would be a visit to Jerusalem. Later on, President Nelson said he had symbolic reasons for planning the global trip as he did. We wanted to start in Jerusalem to fortify ourselves with the message of the Lord Jesus Christ right from its very inception, here where he was born, where he lived, where he ministered, and where he was crucified, President Nelson said. Later on, and this is so interesting what President Holland said, and he, in observing him since I've started this channel, I've noticed that he's dropped a lot of breadcrumbs. He has, and I think that this is one of them. Okay, he said, quote, I suspect none of us in this room can understand the significance of this day, ... but we will. Yeah, this picture speaks volumes, and they published this one in this Newsroom article on the day that he passed away. I think this was huge. Here we're looking at 2 prophets. There's the Temple Mount in the background. If we go back to the spreadsheet, like I said, President Holland was involved in the getting the BYU Jerusalem Center approved. And in this article, this is Church News, October 18th, 2019. This is really, you should read this if you get a chance. You can access my spreadsheets anytime. The link is in the description box of each video. It's best to view them on a desktop or a laptop, and then just double click on the cell that you want to read. But he said it's what the Lord wanted done in that land, the creation of the BYU Jerusalem Center. And then he says, that was one of 33 miracles, large or small, that happened to make the BYU Jerusalem Center possible. Every possible opponent came out against the project. He says that it stands as an idle witness in Jerusalem, which that's kind of interesting. It seemed to be a message from heaven itself. I don't use the word miracle lightly, he says right here. And then he says the Lord can do his own work. He did his own work here. And then I like this last part. I don't know I don't know what it will mean a generation after we're gone or what future purposes the Lord will have for it, but I hope students from all over the world can be blessed by it. My testimony to you is that the Lord wanted that center built and has it there for a great purpose, or for great purposes that we now see only dimly. You know my theory. I believe that it could be one of several temples that will eventually be in Jerusalem. I'm sure that there probably will be a temple again on the Temple Mount. We'll have to see. But just like the New Jerusalem in Independence, Missouri, that's supposed to have a 24 temple complex, I don't see why this couldn't be a temple of Jerusalem. And it's on the same ridge as the Mount of Olives. It's on Mount Scopus, but it's basically the same mountain. It's the same mountain ridge. Um, so, and then I want to point out, now you remember that I think this was in the year 2000. Yeah, I think this came out in conjunction with The Living Christ that was published in the year 2000. Um, they recorded these special Witnesses of Christ videos, one for each apostle, and they've kept it updated. In fact, when President Nelson became president of the church, he redid his video, but he did it during this trip in Jerusalem. And he did it here with the Temple Mount there in the background. So we have him with this. You can find this on the church website. Go to Gospel Library, click on Jesus Christ, and then go to Special Witnesses of Christ. They're serious about these messages. These are almost like official testimonies of these apostles witnessing of Christ. So we had one from President Nelson in Jerusalem, and then the only other one that did one from Jerusalem is President Jeffrey R. Holland. And he did it from the Garden of Gethsemane. I don't know. This is why I'm really paying attention to this. I would pay attention to it anyway, just because of who President Holland was and is. But there's all this additional stuff that we really have to consider when it comes to prophecy and what he did during his life, and now that he's passed away, we just need to watch. But we have these two that gave their Special Witness of Christ testimonies in Jerusalem. I just want to remind you of this. I mentioned it in the last video, but I'm not aware of any other prophet or apostle that's met with an Israeli prime minister. Here you have President Holland and Elder Cook. The occasion was they were there to rededicate the Orson Hyde Memorial Garden on the Mount of Olives. It was the 175th anniversary of the dedication of the Holy Land for the gathering of the Jews. So this is a very, very, very significant picture in my mind, in light of everything that we're talking about. And then on top of all that, look what happened here. I don't think I'm going to read this whole thing, but I should have gone through and done highlights, but I was kind of in a hurry to make this video. So this is something that President Holland said on that occasion to a Jewish audience at the BYU Jerusalem Center. So if you're thinking about a prophet in Jerusalem talking to Jews about the church and their role that they're playing in the last dispensation, here it is. Here's the transcript. Elder Jeffrey R. Holland on the 175th anniversary of Orson Hyde's historic journey. The return of the Jews. You know what? Maybe I will read this. Or I might just kind of skip around. Dear friends, in the midst of all this discussion about Orson Hyde's prayer, the presence of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in Israel, and some history about this magnificent Brigham Young University Center, it strikes me that we may need just a little more context for all this. Someone, some one of you may be asking, what prompted all this Orson Hyde stuff anyway? Let me try to say a word in that regard to provide a backdrop to all of you, to all you are seeing and hearing. You know better than I the promises made to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and posterity, which did not, it turned out, preclude the scattering and dispersion of that posterity, sifted like as corn is sifted in a sieve or a sieve. The prophet Amos described it, fulfilling what Moses had recorded in the Torah. And the Lord shall scatter you among the nations, and ye shall be left few in number among the heathen, whither the Lord shall lead you. But equally prophesied was that ancient Israel would be gathered, as the prophet Ezekiel wrote. I'm going to skip down. Note this prophecy in the Book of Mormon. So this is interesting. He's introducing them to the Book of Mormon, our sacred record, which is Semitic in its origin. And I will remember the covenant which I have made with my people, and I have covenanted with them that I would gather them together in mine own due time, that I would give unto them again the land of their fathers for their inheritance, which is the land of Jerusalem, which is the promised land unto them forever, saith the Father. Then shall they break forth in joy, sing together, ye waste places of Jerusalem, for the Father hath comforted his people, he hath redeemed Jerusalem. All of this, minus the Book of Mormon material, you know far better than I, but I mention it to provide historical context for something not as well known. That is that one of the foundational pieces of LDS theology is that we of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints represent a remnant of the tribe of Joseph. Okay, now this is a big thing to claim to Jews, saying that we believe that we're from the tribe of Joseph. With our patriarchal lines going back principally to Ephraim and Manasseh, in that in such a covenantal relationship, modern prophets have played a role in the gathering of the Jews to their homeland. Now, this is interesting because I wonder if any of them had the thought of Mashiach ben Yosef, which is what they believe is some believe that it's literally a person. Others think that it's maybe a person and a process where those from the tribe of Joseph and someone actually named Joseph would do certain things to prepare the world for Mashiach ben David or the Messiah. I wonder if any of them had this thought. In 1820, a 14-year-old boy named Joseph Smith prayed to know what God would have him do and had a divine manifestation instructing him, among other things, that it was soon time for the scriptural promises given to ancient Israel to be fulfilled, and that he, Joseph Smith Jr., would be instrumental in restoring the priesthood and powers that would bring to fruition those prophecies. Following the dedication of the first Latter-day Saint temple built in the tradition of, but not with the luxury of, the Temple of Solomon, the young prophet Joseph Smith, by then 30 years of age, was visited by a series of Old Testament prophets who appeared and initiated the fulfillment of many of the promises we have been referring to today. Okay, so he informs them that temples are back, that the temple has been rebuilt. Of course, in this one, he's referring to the Kirtland Temple. And then he says, one visitor was the prophet Elijah. Now, that's big news to the Jews. Of course, them listening to him, who knows if they were touched by the Spirit? I'm sure that they were. But to make that claim, that's big in Judaism because they're expecting Messiah, or they're expecting Elijah. It's incorporated in some of the feast days. One visitor was the prophet Elijah, in fulfillment of the scriptural promise recorded by Malachi. Behold, I will send you Elijah the prophet before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. And he shall turn the heart of the fathers to the children, and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. He talks about the fact Moses appeared. That's obviously a big one for the Jews, Moses. And yeah, I think that's all that I want to cover. And then he, talks about the fact that Orson Hyde came and dedicated the land. So this is something that Jeffrey R. Holland did. I don't know if there's been other talks like this, tailored specifically for Jews. And if there are, if they were given in Jerusalem. But that's what happened here. So President Holland gave this talk to Jewish, dignitaries and notable people. He met with Benjamin Netanyahu along with another prophet, Elder Cook. And then he went with, a couple years later, he went with President Nelson, president of the church, to the BYU Jerusalem Center, where President Nelson recorded his special witness of Christ, a new one. It's and then President Holland said of that trip, let me just read it one more time. He said, "I suspect none of us in this room can understand the significance of this day, but we will." So let's all say a prayer for President Holland's family and friends and for the whole church. I know that the whole church is feeling this. He was a great man, and for all the reasons that I just listed and more, he really stood out. It's so surreal to me, and it's hard to picture what's going to happen going forward. Having a quorum of the 12 apostles without President Holland. That's hard to picture. I guess there's one more thing I want to point out. Let's see. The family proclamation. Yeah, I was thinking about this earlier, but then it slipped my mind. So he was one of the signers. Okay, here we go. I was thinking of the Living Christ, but this also applies to the family proclamation, even though you don't have signatures at the bottom. You had Russell Nelson, down H. Oaks, down here, the bottom middle, the last two right here. And by the way, if you include the first presidency, and if you start counting like 1, 2, 3, President Nelson is the 8th. So you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And then you have President Nelson right there, and he's in the middle. And then afterwards, you have another 8. So I just think that's kind of interesting. But you have President Nelson, President Oaks, in that order. And then the very last two were President Holland and President Eyring. So of the original signers of the Living Christ and those that introduced the family proclamation, the only two that remain at this point are President Oaks and President Eyring. So I think that's interesting too. But all right, well, that's going to be it for this one. If you have any other realizations or observations that I missed, please let me know in the comments or send me an email, and I'll talk to you guys later.